So, Larry, I have to say, until Friday, I thought the big story was going to be what Jay Powell had to say. And then those jobs numbers came in. And obviously, the number of jobs was really impressive, but also the average hourly wage. Wow.
Look, what we saw was a 7.5% annual wage increase for the month, a 6% wage increase for the last 3 months, and a 5% increase for the year. So it's high and it's rising. And the labor market is strong. And we're still in unprecedented territory in terms of the gap between vacancies and jobs. And I think that what that's got to tell you is that we got a long way to go to getting inflation down where the Fed has said that it wants it to be. We don't know how this is all going to play out, but for my money, the best single measure of core underlying inflation is to look at wages. It's interesting, that's what Paul Krugman acknowledged today when he said that he was shaken in his views by these numbers. And I think what this is telling us is that the Fed's got a long way to go.
So how's that going to happen? I mean, we heard Jay Powell talk about the JOLTS numbers, for example. So we've got a big gap between the people trying to get people to work and the people actually working. As long as you have that, you've got this pressure. He said we've got to get demand down so that, in fact, we are not seeking as many people in the workforce. But how does that get done? It's not getting done yet.
It's not getting done yet. And what that says is we're probably going to need increases in interest rates. I suspect they're going to need more increases in interest rates than the market is now judging or than they're now saying. Look, every time they revise their forecast of inflation up and they revise their forecast of ultimate unemployment up as well. And gosh, we've all been at the airport and they say it's leaving at 7:30 and then they say it's leaving at 8:30 and then they say it's leaving at 9:30. And when I see that happen, I think it's leaving at 11. And it's something like that with these economic forecasts. So I hope I'm wrong, but my sense is that inflation is going to be a little more sustained than what people are looking for. And my sense also is that it's much harder than many people think to achieve a soft landing because there are all these mechanisms that kick in. At a certain point, consumers run out of their savings, and then you have a Wile E. Coyote kind of moment where consumption falls off. At a certain point, people start putting their houses on the market, and then you see house prices falling, and then other people rush to put them on the market. At a certain point, you see credit drying up, and when credit dries up, people can't pay back their old borrowings. So there is this proposition, we've talked about it before on the show, David. It's called Salm's Rule, that says that when the unemployment rate goes up by 0.5%, it goes up by more than 2%. And that's because once you get into a negative situation, there's an avalanche aspect. And I think we have a real risk that that's going to happen at some point.
So to continue your airport analogy, when is the plane going to leave? Because we heard Jay Powell this week say, don't pay as much attention to how fast we're going up, because everybody jumped in the fact he was pretty clearly signaling 50 basis points rather than 75. He said, pay attention to the terminal rate. I'm not sure the markets did that. So where do you think the terminal rate is now?
Look, I've been saying that relative to the 5 that's priced into the market, a little below 5, I think that's got to be low or likely to be low because I always try to look for possible errors, and 4 seems almost impossible, and 6 is certainly a scenario we can write, and that tells me that 5 is not a good best guess for where it's going to be. In terms of what will happen, I guess I think there's an old saying that things happen faster than you think they will. So don't happen as fast as you think they will, and then they happen faster than you thought they could. And I think that may be the way it is with the downturn. I don't know when it's going to come, but when it kicks in, I suspect it'll be fairly forceful.
I got an email, as you know, Larry, this week from a loyal viewer of Wall Street Weekend, particularly a loyal viewer of yours, saying, I really love hearing from Larry Summers. And he asked the question. He said, what's so magic about the 2%? I mean, why can't we live with 3% or 4% for that matter?
First of all, I think it's important to understand that having failed for a while to hit 2%, it's kind of problematic then to declare that it's no longer our goal, even if it was a somewhat arbitrary goal in the first place. Second, we've already backed away from the 2% in a sense. We've been, for years, well above 2%, and nobody's saying we should swing below 2% so it all averages out to be 2. So in some sense, we're already not really trying for a 2% average inflation target. We're trying for a 2% minimum inflation target, and that's different than what we originally set out to. So we've already eased. Third, if we settle in for a 3% inflation target, then where do we think it's going to go? Presumably there's going to be a low point of inflation in this cycle, David, and from that low point, it will rise. So saying 3% as a target for what we're disinflating to isn't saying 3% as an average for the next cycle. So what I think we should do is stay with the 2% target, recognize, as I think is surely right, that that's going to be a low point, not an average, but I think that's all right.
There was news that went beyond the U.S. economy this week, and it had to do with China. We had demonstrations at the beginning of the week. They seem to be settling down a little bit because they're easing off on the COVID restrictions. But it's pretty clear that the Chinese economy is struggling some, in part because of those restrictions. Give us a sense of what the risks are there for the global economy because of what's going on in China right now.
Look, it's possible that we're going to gain a little strength because it's quite possible that they are going to open up a bit in response to these protests, and then the Chinese economy is going to go faster. And when it goes faster, that will be an impetus to commodity prices. That will help parts of the global economy. I think the challenge for them is that they've only got 1/5 as many intensive care units per person and 1/3 as many nurses as we do per person. And they don't have much immunity. And so it could spread like wildfire, and they could have a very scary situation. And that's their tension, really. They can save the economy or they can save their populations near perfect health, but I don't think they're going to be able to do both.
Well, and to your point, Larry, it seems to me that we can sit here and say you should ease up some of your COVID restrictions. They have to be data dependent in their own way. It depends on how many infections they get, how many intensive care units are being used, and stuff like that. They may have to adjust their approach.
They're surely going to have to adjust. They're surely going to have to titrate their approach over time, and I don't think it's going to be easy. I do think sooner or later they're going to have to do this, and they're not gaining a lot by postponing it. So I think a managed exit from zero COVID is probably the right thing for them to do, and I think the protesters have probably pushed them in that direction, and that's probably a good thing for them and for the global economy, but it's going to be a very rough patch.
Finally, Larry, what does this potentially mean for the rest of the economy, the global economy? Because we had David Malpass on this week, and he said he thinks there's going to be recessions in a lot of countries around the world.
I think that's fair. I think that is fairly likely, not so much because of what's happening in China, but you got big challenges in China. We've got a good chance of going into recession. Europe's more difficult than we are. Those are the three big poles of the global economy, and if they all slow, others are going to slow along with them. And of course, this is going to be a relatively high interest rate recession, not like the low interest rate recessions we've seen in the past. And that's also going to be problematic for emerging markets.
What does that say to the Biden administration? I mean, they've got a new Congress coming in. They're not going to have a majority in the House. If you were there now, if you were back in one of your old jobs in the White House, what is the best economic policy you could pursue given all the uncertainties and the risks?
Look, they've got to execute what they've got in place. It's huge on infrastructure. It's huge on science and technology. They've got to implement that as effectively as they can. And they've got to lead the world in a strong response to all these various global challenges. But they've got their work cut out for them.
Can they invest in global health issues? Because you've always been very concerned about that.
Look, the biggest opportunity today is to put money into pandemic prevention. Another pandemic is likely to come within 15 years. And unless we do more, we're not going to be more ready next time than we were last time.